you look at this as like a civilizational or cultural cancer, somehow this cancer went from not existing to stage 1, and from stage 1 to stage 2. It's not really that hard to see how it metastasized since then. And I bumbled into being able to tell that story. The idea, I mean, Jordan Peterson was knocking on the door when he was calling it postmodern neo-Marxism. And then Helen and I were like yelling at him, totally wrong. No, totally right. Turns out it is the fusion of postmodernism and neo-Marxism.
Why did you think he was wrong?
Because I didn't know what all the words meant.
Okay. Within these documents.
And that's why I think 90% of the people who spend their time telling people on the internet that they're wrong, genuinely, a lot of times are just, they don't know what the words mean. They don't actually know what they're reading. Or it exposes something they don't want exposed, but that's not the case here. Peterson wasn't an enemy. We were also in a milieu coming out of the New Atheist movement that I think was heavily influenced by critical theory in terms of how it thought. And so that gave us a gigantic blind spot in terms of the neo-Marxist aspect. I had also read Stephen Hicks's admirable book explaining postmodernism, and he kind of, he doesn't give a lot of attention to the neo-Marxists. In fact, he kind of goes, through Rousseau, Kant and Rousseau and all of the, that old deep philosophy of the counter-enlightenment track that he's trying to draw. Then he gets into Marx and the collectivism being kind of key to this counter-enlightenment thing. And he eventually says, well, the Marxists became postmodernist in order to keep doing their thing. That's the end of explaining postmodernism. And I was satisfied with that explanation. So the neo-Marxist part it wasn't the postmodern. I understood the postmodern part. I did not understand the neo-Marxist side. And so fortunately, a friend of mine stuck a copy of Marcuse's Repressive Tolerance under my nose and said, read this. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So I was in a hotel and literally laid down on my bed and laying there, like, didn't want to go to sleep yet, but didn't have anything to do because I'm in a hotel. And so then I was like, fuck it, I'll read it. And I start reading it. It's kind of late, like 11:15, 11:30 something. And I probably had to be up at like 7 or 6 or some stupid hour. And I started reading it and I couldn't stop reading it. And I kept reading it and it was like, at first I was like, okay, this is strange. And then by the end, I'm like, oh my God, this is what's happening in our world right now. Repressive tolerance is the description of our world, written down as a goal in 1965 by this guy. So then it was like, shit, I have to read everything this guy has written and find out what's going on. And so then everybody's heard me talk about Marcuse for obscene amounts of time. So then all of a sudden I was like, damn it, Peterson was right. It is postmodern neo-Marxism. The correct term, the academic term, which I had already agreed on, what somebody asked me very early on when we were doing cynical theories, what's applied postmodernism? What is the real, because we made that up. What is the real name for it? And the real name for it is critical constructivism.
Ooh.
And it took me embarrassingly long to figure out that critical constructivism was the fusion of social constructivism in the postmodern sense and critical theory in the neo-Marxist sense. In other words, postmodern neo-Marxism. We were already using the term critical constructivism to mean applied postmodernism or postmodern neo-Marxism in Peterson's language, but I hadn't bridged the gap and like, oh, that's what happened. And then I started studying enough Hegel to understand what a dialectical synthesis is. And I was like, oh, it is a dialectical synthesis of postmodernism and neo-Marxism. And the way that it does it is it reorganizes the social constructivist thesis of, this is high tech. Kimberly Crenshaw specifically can be credited for this, although she may have been running in a stream of other people thinking similar stuff. But what happened was she took the social constructivist thesis and applied critical theory to it and turned it into a critical theory analyzed object itself. And that's where you fuse the two together. Mm-hmm. And that happened in the paper Mapping the Margins. And I've done several podcasts and talked about this obscene numbers of times. There's no reason to like hash it out again unless we just want to get into it. But that story has not been told. How, in essence, and this is what was I doing today? I was editing the book that I'm trying to get out as fast as possible at Critical Race Theory, and I was actually editing the chapter that covers exactly this subject. And which is 3. It is chapter 3 of the book, which has 6 chapters total. And so I was staring at these ideas all day long, and the map is, how did Marxism go? Where did it go? It went to cultural Marxism, and of course, it didn't die. People are still doing old Marxism, and the older cultural Marxists are probably still around. Certainly, critical theory, which arose sort of out of the cultural Marxist milieu, neo-Marxism. Certainly, people are still doing critical theory in various degrees of Marxian flavor, and then there's this leap to woke. And so I can tell the story of that leap to woke. That's what, like, if you said, what is it that you do? I tell the story of that leap. That's my contribution to the world. I figured out that leap. And that leap is something that I'm branding identity Marxism. And I think, nailed it down to the ideas, especially coming out of the Frankfurt School in the 1960s, but especially Herbert Marcuse's ideas, made the way to shift into an identity politics frame out of an economic frame. And then a generation of activists ran with that idea and started cramming it, because Long March to the Institutions had also been realized by the late 60s, cramming it into every institution you possibly can imagine. And so what I see myself as doing is being able to tell that story so that other people who are much more practically minded than I am can do something with that information. If you know where the cancer came from, you know how the cancer operates, then people who have a more practical mind, for example, Chris Rufo, can apply that information in a context. In his, it's the political arena, the media and political arena, to extract results. And I think the model's proven.